Alright, so I've been writing essays consistently for the past decade, and I've noticed something pretty surprising. Good essay writing has nothing to do with writing good essays. So back in 2012, when I first began really seriously thinking about how can I improve my essay writing, my thought process was very much like, if I want to improve at something, if I want to get good at essay writing, I need to practice it. I need to write day in, day out to get better at that thing. And so that's what I did. I tinkered around with essay structure, I read like a bunch of different books about how to write well, and I basically spent all my time just trying to perfect the art of essay writing. You see, I just really cared about getting my essays right. But you see, there was a problem. In fact, there were probably two problems. The first was that I hated writing every single essay. You know, like every time I sat down at my desk thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to write a really good essay today, within 5 minutes I was hating my life. I'd rather gouge out my eyes than put another word on the page. And even if it was on a topic that I thought I enjoyed, it never really translated into a decent essay. It was just such a laborious and painful process from start to finish. And secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, all the time I spent on trying to improve my essays didn't actually translate into better grades. In fact, there are occasions where I thought I wrote some really decent essays, but once I got them back, I got the feedback back from like the lecturer or a teacher or whoever, it ended up being some of my worst essays. It just completely flopped. So all of this just reached its height during my first year at university, and I was sat there in the library with a bunch of textbooks in front of me, a whole heap of notes, and I was just thinking, what has my life come to? I feel like I'm wasting the best years of my life sat in this library working. I just don't want to continue, and honestly at that point I just wanted to give up. But fortunately, during one of my mindless moments of procrastination, I came across this really interesting story that I want to share with you now. Basically, I found this story about a pottery teacher called Brian that goes a little bit like this. Basically, Brian decided to split his class into two groups. Group A was focused on making one pot every single day for the next 30 days, whereas Group B was focused on making on a single pot across the next 30 days. So Group A would finish with 30 pots in total, and Group B would have a single pot. And so at the end of the process, Brian decided he was going to judge who made the best pots. And without exception, every single one of the top 10 best pots made came from Group A, i.e. the people who made a single pot every single day of the process, and not the guys who were focused on quality and making the single best pot they could across that same time period. So what I learned from this story was that my desire to write the perfect essay wasn't actually helping me to write good essays. I really needed to change the way I did things. So really, the way I should be approaching my essay writing should be kind of like the pot makers who didn't really care about making the perfect pot first time round. Ernest Hemingway wrote the ending to A Farewell to Arms 47 times because, as he so eloquently put it, the first draft of anything is shit. And you know what? We shouldn't shy away from that. The idea then is that whenever we begin writing an essay, our goal should be to capture thoughts and not to curate perfect sentences. And this is just such a liberating thought. Our grammar can be awful, we can just choose all the wrong words, the whole essay can be this massive jumbled mess, and it just doesn't matter at all. You see, the important thing is that we're capturing our thoughts and sort of following ideas wherever they take us. And this can be really surprising too. Like, we can come up with some really brilliant ideas, and it can also be super enjoyable because we're not restricted by the thought that things need to be perfect. So this all led me to my first realization about essay writing. Just writing stuff down, no matter how fast, bad and wrong it may be, is the true antidote to the fear of imperfection and boredom. But as it turns out, it wasn't the antidote to procrastination. Whenever I was writing my essays, I still found myself getting distracted, losing my train of thought, and sort of getting lost halfway through a paragraph. And so this led me to a second realization. Eagerness is the enemy of excellence. The idea here is that we all tend to procrastinate whenever we start writing an essay because it just feels like such a heavy lift. And we don't want to write because we don't actually know what to write. And so we dive into the essay hoping for divine inspiration, just to realise that that divine inspiration isn't going to come and we end up doing something completely different. So the solution then is to stop being so eager and to write from abundance. This means finding every single bit of information we need before we even begin writing. So by the time we actually sit down and write the essay, we know exactly what that essay is going to look like. We know the main points that we want to make, we know the structure, we have all the supporting evidence we need to back up those points too. And so really 90% of the work involved in writing a good essay is actually in this planning phase, and for most people this is pretty simple to do. So when it comes to actually writing the essay itself, all we're doing is turning those notes and that plan into full prose, into full sentences. So we don't actually have to stop after every single sentence to think, what is it I'm trying to say? Instead, we're just writing the thing out. We don't need to stop, we can unleash our creativity and we can just let things flow. As a result, this whole process literally takes about a tenth of the time it normally would to write our essay. But by this point, we've pretty much just vomited everything we know onto a page to optimize for creativity and insight. But now we want to optimize for clarity and coherence by killing our darlings. Now, this phrase killing our darlings does sound a little strange, but hear me out. Basically, a darling is a part of our essay that is disproportionately important to us rather than to the point we're trying to make. So if we spend like 2 paragraphs trying to explain something that we find interesting or over-analysing a certain area of the topic, it's not really that important. It's a darling because it doesn't actually help us to drive the thesis home or to kind of make the point we're trying to make as clear as possible. In fact, I found that there are usually 2 darlings that we all tend to have in our essays. The first darling is not writing for the reader, and the second one is writing to impress rather than to express. So first, not writing for the reader. So basically, those essays that I typically found that crashed and burnt for me were those essays where I was probably feeling a little narcissistic. Like, I was writing because I wanted to answer a question that I found interesting rather than answering a question that the reader expected me to answer. One thing that I quite like to do to combat this is to find a beta reader. And a beta reader, it can be pretty much anyone, but they've got to be willing to proofread my essay and especially focus on the phrases and the sentence structure and sort of the evidence that I bring into my essay to explain my points. And if they find themselves getting lost or confused or they can't really follow my train of thought, then they've probably stumbled across one of my darlings. Now, the next type of darling is a darling where we try to impress rather than express. I love trying to make my essay sound as fancy as possible when I first started, making me sound a little bit like Boris Johnson on drugs, resulting in pompous circumlocution and sesquipedalian prose that was super hard to follow. You see, we're all somewhat kind of pre-programmed to think that if we can sound smart, our essays are going to sound better. So, at school we're told things like, oh, don't use the word nice when you can use words like marvellous or delightful or pleasurable or things like that. And so we end up in this sort of situation where we feel that we need to choose a word that sounds impressive. But the reality is that this is the opposite of what we should be doing. We should be writing to express rather than try to impress. So what does this involve? Well, basically it involves removing Velcro to create flow. One way in which we can remove this figurative Velcro is to ensure we're guiding the reader from start to finish, with every single sentence and paragraph building upon the last one to ensure we're driving the argument forward. If we're having a hard time working out how to move the essay from one paragraph or sentence to the next, it's probably because we shouldn't be taking the essay or argument in that direction yet, or perhaps there's like a crucial missing link between both the sentences or both the paragraphs, like maybe there's a missing idea or a missing piece of evidence. We're basically just trying to make the intellectual jumps from sentence to sentence as small as possible, and to make it as clear as possible how what they previously read logically leads on to what they're about to read. Another way that we could potentially remove the Velcro and to minimize intellectual somersaults is to use smaller words, or to be more precise, we should use Saxon base words rather than their Latin counterparts. Like, take for example the word utilize. It's just a noxious puff word. It doesn't do anything that the word use doesn't already do. And so whenever we're thinking about what are the right words to use, try to use the more concrete and familiar Saxon words. So I guess really the main thing I've learned from the last decade of essay writing is that great essays are all about making things as simple as possible. If you want to see exactly how I write my essays, then make sure you check out my video somewhere over here, and also check out all the resources on my website. Thank you for watching, and I shall see you soon. Goodbye.